Thanks so much. So let's get started here in this webinar. It's called Cool, Cooler, Coolest, HVAC Savings in School Building Retrofits. And we're providing this webinar to give you some resources in selecting how to replace existing HVAC systems when they're nearing the end of their life in an existing building. So let's jump right in now. Our agenda today, we're going to do a little bit of basic foundational work just to talk about why it's important to look at energy efficiency in your buildings. From there, we'll move on to a primary goal of a lot of the Quaker schools that we've talked to, which is getting to net zero energy and in steps along the way using more renewable energy. And sometimes we're asked, well, why don't we just go right to the renewable energy instead of worrying about the energy efficiency? So we're going to answer those questions, we hope. And then what are the maximum efficiencies you can get out of a heating, ventilating, and air conditioning system? There's a wide range of systems out there that you can use, wide range of pricing as well. So we're going to talk about that a little bit, the financial returns of some of the efficiency that we can invest in. And so that was that last bullet there. So just a quick introduction to me. I started this company 13 years ago, and our primary client base is schools and municipalities. We work with a lot of private schools and school districts and provide a wide range of support services related to energy. Even though a lot of facility managers have a lot of knowledge about the systems in their buildings and how they purchase energy, they don't really have the opportunity to be experts in every area of energy efficiency and renewable energy, and even the financial elements of managing energy. And so we have multiple people on our staff here who are experts in different areas of energy and energy efficiency. So we're coming from that background in providing this presentation. There's a list of clients shown here. I don't think I need to read any of them off, but kind of focused on the municipal and school clients as well. So working for a lot of different people in the Mid-Atlantic region. So why focus on energy? Why is it important? Number one always seems to come up that it reduces operating costs for whatever entity is using the energy or whatever entity is paying for the energy. And so if you can use less energy, obviously you're going to pay less out of your budget towards your energy costs, and you're going to have more in your budget for your primary mission, which is educating students, providing those educational services. So anything extra you're paying towards energy that's unnecessary is a waste of budget that doesn't go to your primary mission. There's also environmental and health benefits to using less energy. A lot of the energy that we use, we're burning things to produce that energy. That tends to cause pollution in our atmosphere, whether it's air pollution like sulfur dioxide or carbon monoxide. These are things that actually kill us or make us sick. On top of that, you have carbon dioxide emissions, which are warming the planet, changing the climate, and are predicted to cause a lot of issues with every country on Earth and with every society, and not just in places that are, third world countries. It's going to hit us home right here, and so we really need to address that. And then the health benefits, it's reduced emissions into the atmosphere of these harmful chemicals. Everything from lead to mercury. We have particulates that go into the air that cause damage to the lungs of young children and developing teenagers as they're running around outside playing sports or doing things outdoors, and it affects the elderly population as well. So anything we can do to burn less of these fossil fuels really helps our environment and our health. in addition to that, just recovering things like natural gas through fracking or offshore drilling for oil, those also have a major impact on our environment. And it's at the point where those impacts occur even before we're actually burning the fuels to use for energy. And these fossil fuels are finite resources. At some point, we're going to run out. They took millions of years to form, and we're using them a lot more quickly than they can form new resources in that way. So it makes sense to be using our technology and using our ability that we have available to us now to use more renewable energy and to use less of the finite resources as much as we can. And the last item just for this particular presentation, when you buy a new heating and air conditioning system, it's a large expense and it's something that you're going to tend to use for 15 to 25 years. So anything you're doing right now kind of commits you to a certain type of way to manage your heating and air conditioning. You're either doing it with electricity or oil or natural gas, propane. I don't think many people are using coal anymore. I hope not. So any investment you make, you're pretty much stuck with for a long period of time. So you want to make sure that you're using the best options available to you. So your new heating, ventilating, and air conditioning systems are this long-term commitment, and you don't really know what fuel prices are going to do in the future. And so you want to invest in systems that will allow you to have more certainty in your long-term costs. And that's where going to something that can be run with renewable energy is a great benefit for you. So really, by saving energy, you're saving money, you're getting paid to do the right thing by the environment and obviously financially. So just looking at some of the options you have for your heating and air conditioning systems. For heating, look at what crude oil prices have done over the years. Totally unpredictable. They can skyrocket in a short period of time, drop again, and then skyrocket again, and it seems to be a regular pattern. So there's a lot of risk when you're investing in equipment that uses oil. Same thing with natural gas, even though we're at a kind of a lull or a low price compared to where we've been over the past 20 years, with natural gas pipelines going in and other issues, you don't know what's going to happen with the cost of natural gas. So you want to make sure you're making both the right environmental decision, which is looking at renewable energy and running your buildings with that. But it also, even though in the short term it might not look like the best financial decision, over the long term, it's actually eliminating your risk. And let me show you how that shows up in a graph. Look at wind power prices. Compare that to the chart you saw for oil and natural gas. This is the steady decline, a little bit of a bump up when there was there were some investment tax credits and other incentives for doing wind power. So the price went up a little bit again, but it's been on a downward trend for a long period of time. Same thing with solar cells. The prices of solar panels themselves are much, much cheaper than they were 20 years ago. And that's a trend that's expected to continue as technology improves and as more people use solar. So this can actually be, for the long term, your most cost-effective option in powering your buildings. So if you're investing in electrification of some of your systems, and I'll explain that later, it could be the right financial decision and not just the right environmental decision. So I do want to give a little background, since we're talking about energy efficiency, just to say what that term actually means. A lot of people kind of have a concept of what it means, but I like to sometimes have a dictionary definition or something similar. So I'm just going to read it right off the slide, even though you can do that too. Energy efficiency is the ratio of useful work performed by a machine or in a process to the total energy expended or heat taken in, usually as a percentage. So how much do you get out of the energy that you're putting into it? If you're able to use every bit of that heat and energy in your process, that would be a 100% efficient um, piece of equipment. So a lot of motors are 60 to 80% efficient. You actually get 60% out of it from what you put in. I think an incandescent light bulb is something like 30% or 20% efficient. It's actually really terrible efficiency as far as converting electricity to light. And so we have all these more efficient alternatives that are coming up on a regular basis. So, knowing all this, you would think, okay, let's try to get as close to 100% efficient as possible. But I'm going to say that that actually should not be your goal. Your goal should be to get to more than 100% efficient. And I know that doesn't sound possible. It's not really possible with a motor, but it is possible with other types of equipment. And I'll explain that in a little bit, and hopefully explain it in a way that you can understand and use to your benefit when you're looking at your heating and air conditioning systems in the future. Another question that I get asked on a pretty regular basis is, why spend the time worrying about how efficient we are? Why don't we just install renewable energy and that'll power our buildings, and we don't have to care how much we're wasting and how much we're using in the building. The big issue is there's a much better return on investment for doing efficiency and investing in efficiency and energy conservation than there is just doing a solar installation. So if you can cut your energy use by 40%, you can cut the size of a future solar installation by 40% as well. And typically you're saving more money by not installing some of that solar than you would save by just putting solar PV in on its own. So these opportunities for efficiency are just great to take advantage of as a first step when you're thinking about upgrading your buildings. So one of the ways we've looked at it to get an actual price in it, you look at the cost of what would you have to do to get a 100,000 kilowatt hour reduction in your energy use by investing in more efficient equipment, and how much would you have to spend to generate 100,000 kilowatt hours with a solar array? Because actually they have the same impact on your environmental impact and on your total energy use. They're both reducing your energy use by 100,000 kilowatt hours from traditional sources of fuel like natural gas and oil. It's much cheaper to invest in that energy efficiency first, and then later in your plan for upgrading your facilities, investing in solar to take care of the rest. So we want to look at where the best opportunities are in saving energy, and typically it is in heating and air conditioning and lighting as well. So this little chart, pie chart, shows that on typical buildings, 40 to 50% of the energy use is in heating and air conditioning. Typically 20 to 30% is in lighting as well. And the building envelope, that's just your exterior envelope of your building. The big impact of that is on your heating and air conditioning. So that's why we want to look at that, as well as looking at the actual systems that you install. So as we think about the return on investment and what we're getting out of our heating and air conditioning systems, we want to think about the difference between new construction and existing buildings. So with new construction, you have to put some type of heating and air conditioning system in as part of your design. And so when you're looking at a highly efficient system, when you're looking at a payback or a return on investment for that more efficient system, you want to compare it to the price, you want to compare your savings to the price difference between a standard minimum code system and a highly efficient system. And look at that cost difference, look at the cost savings on energy, and determine your return on investment that way. Where with existing buildings, if you're thinking about replacing a system that's 5 or 6, 7 years old, you don't have to replace it at that time because it's still operating properly. And so you would have to look at the whole cost or a big portion of the cost of that investment in doing your return on investment calculation. Now that changes for an existing building when your system is at the end of its service life. So you have a 25-year-old boiler that's starting to cause problems and starting to break down. You have to replace that anyway. So no matter what you do, you're paying something for a boiler replacement. So if you go in and get the minimum efficiency boiler, say that costs you $10,000, you're going to get an efficiency of about 80%. You're actually, if you invested in something that could be at 97% efficiency, maybe that costs you $3,000 more than the $10,000 minimum code boiler, you would actually make up that cost difference within a few years, and that would help pay for the higher efficiency thing that you invested in. So one of the things we like to recommend to our clients is to do an assessment of their facility, do an energy audit, maybe even a schematic design when you're 1, 2, 3, 5 years before your system is reaching the end of its life, so that you're prepared when it's ready to replace it, especially if it fails and you have to replace it on an emergency basis. You'd already have a schematic design available, or you'd already have at least a type of system selected that's going to maximize the efficiency and also put you on a path towards zero carbon emissions. And so that may preclude buying a gas boiler or an oil boiler or an oil furnace because you can't actually get renewable sources of oil and natural gas. One thing that a lot of entities do, building owners do, they rely on their maintenance contractor to replace their systems with what their maintenance contractor would say is a much more efficient system. But often the only reason it's more efficient is that it's newer, but it's not actually improving the efficiency. It's still a minimum code efficiency system. So you do want to get some kind of third party in to help you decide what to do when you're nearing end of life on your systems. And those consultants can typically calculate the financial returns as well as the energy savings that you're going to get out of the more efficient systems. So I want to talk about efficiency in heating, ventilating, and air conditioning. I mentioned before doing better than 100% efficiency. There are opportunities to do that, and I'll provide some examples for you here. With heating systems, typically an oil furnace, the day you get a brand new furnace is going to be at about 80% efficiency, and it's going to tend to drop from there as it gets older. And so that's about the best you can do for an oil heat system. Standard gas boiler, natural gas boiler, is going to be at about 85% efficiency. And so you're a little bit better than an oil heater, but you're still wasting a lot. 15% of your input is disappearing and is not coming out as the output that heats your space. So there is a decent amount of waste there, as well as the emissions from burning the fuel. If you get a modular condensing boiler, that's the most efficient type of boiler you can get. You can push that up to 95 to 98% efficiency, which is nice. You're putting 10 to 13% less emissions into the atmosphere, but you'll never get to zero emissions into the atmosphere with that condensing boiler. But at least you're approaching a higher efficiency there, and you're not wasting as much. Uh, to me, there's one of the most troubling things is polluting the air with burning fuels that you don't have to burn because you're inefficient or because your system isn't the best system that you can get. Now you can get to an electric system that doesn't directly use oil or natural gas. Obviously, if it uses electricity, a good portion of our electricity is generated with natural gas, but you have an option going forward to replace that to generate your own energy. Now, the coefficient of performance, which is just a different way to state the efficiency for an air source heat pump, can be over 2, which is basically for every 1 BTU that you put into it in electricity, you're getting 2 BTUs of heating out of it. And so that's actually 200% efficiency. As you get to a ground source heat pump, or geothermal, as we call it, coefficient of performance can be 3 to 4, and actually newer systems, they can be over 4. So you're looking at really 400% efficiency. For every BTU you put in, you're getting 4 BTUs out. Where for the oil heat, every BTU you put in, you're only getting 0.8 BTUs out. So much improved as you get to these other systems. Cooling efficiency is even better than the heating efficiency. Typical rooftop unit direct expansion air conditioning system, you can get a coefficient of performance as high as 2.8, and this is pretty standard equipment. A packaged unit, something like that, that sits on your roof that can provide heat and air conditioning, or air conditioning only. But as you get to the air source heat pump, your coefficient of performance can get up to 5 or even higher. And that air source heat pump is pulling heat from the air inside the building and taking it outside the building. And the way the heat pump is set up, that can be very efficient. Using a water-cooled centrifugal chiller has a coefficient of performance over 5.5. We often recommend that for buildings where there's a lot of terminal units, like fan coil units, already in place. And here you are at over 550% efficiency with that central chiller. Often we recommend that in places where there's a campus and there are multiple buildings, and that central plant chiller can actually provide cooling to multiple buildings. And it runs really efficiently at part load as well, where the typical sources of air conditioning, they're using just as much energy when it's 78 degrees out and they're cooling as they do when it's 92 degrees out and they're cooling during the times that they're on and running, where centrifugal chiller can actually scale back and run highly efficiently. And then you get to geothermal and you're looking at coefficient of performance up to 18, comparing that to 2.8 for a typical rooftop unit. So there's huge savings available. And this really comes into play for schools, especially for schools that use their facilities during summer months. If you don't air condition your buildings very much during the summer, then you may not get as much benefit out of geothermal, but you could still use air source heat pumps. It's a lower investment, but it's still much more efficient than a typical system that you would buy. And so really the opportunities here are to get that coefficient of performance up. With geothermal, you're up to 18. Variable refrigerant flow systems also can be up over 15 in their coefficient of performance. They're a little bit cheaper than geothermal systems, but they are on the expensive end of things. So I mentioned before this idea of electrification, and we really have been discussing that with a lot of our clients that have some aggressive, whether short-term or long-term environmental goals, where they want to reduce emissions in a significant way. And so if you're heating your buildings using natural gas or oil, that typically makes up about 50% of the BTUs that you use for your building. If you decide to install some kind of renewable energy system, or even just purchase renewable energy off the grid, whether it's through a grid supplier or through community solar, which is starting to make advancements here in the mid-Atlantic states, you can only offset what you're doing with electricity by purchasing that renewable energy or by installing renewable energy. So even if you make 100% of your electricity using renewable energy, 50% of your energy use is still with natural gas or oil, and there's nothing you can do to offset that. So investing in these electricity-based systems is going to give you the option in the long term to look at renewable energy, and whether it's purchasing it from someone directly or installing your own system, you're going to be limited by how much you use electricity to run your systems. So any options you have for renewable energy, they all involve electricity: wind, solar, hydro. It's all really important to try to get away from natural gas or oil-fired systems. And once you invest in a new system now, if it's oil or gas, you're probably going to be using that for 15 to 20 years. And a lot of our clients are looking at the year 2030 as a net zero year for their CO2 emissions. And so obviously you would have to replace all of that equipment again, maybe halfway through its service life. So you're really not, even though it looks like that equipment is cheaper, the fact that you would have to replace it sooner is going to affect your overall life cycle cost when you're evaluating that option. So really our only option to get to net zero carbon is using electricity for all your heating and cooling. And so once you make that commitment, then it's trying to find which is the best option of those electric-based systems. What's going to work the best for you? And some of that's going to depend on how you deliver the heating and cooling to your spaces. Is it with fan coil units, or is it with heat pumps or other things like that? And so that's something that a mechanical engineer can help you with and evaluate for you and help you make that decision. But the first decision you have to make is, are we going to commit to net zero carbon emissions at some point in the future? What is that date? And what do we need to do to get there? And if your goal is to get there in 40 or 50 years, then the things that you do right now are not quite as critical. If the goal is to get there in a reasonable amount of time to try to really have an impact on it, then you're going to need to make a decision on this electrification. Really important call for you to make before you go any further in investing in your facilities. So I just had some diagrams of different systems that are electricity based. There's a ground source heat pump, which we call geothermal, but it really pulls heat from and dumps heat into the ground, during cooling season and pulls heat from the same area during heating season. And that's really just getting free heat or free cooling. There's water source heat pumps, air source heat pumps. There's a diagram of VRF on the bottom, and that's becoming more and more common here in the Mid-Atlantic. It hadn't been used a lot, but it's basically, rather than using water through the heat pumps, they use a refrigerant through the heat pumps, and it operates more efficiently than water does. I did want to look at a couple of financial returns, because often these investments pay for themselves, and sometimes they more than pay for themselves. And so One project we had where they got a low interest loan to do the project. There was a lighting project and a heating and air conditioning project. The lighting project had a really fast payback. The heating and air conditioning a little bit longer, but they were able to get rebates from the local utility. And then when you looked at the annual savings, I rounded some of these numbers off just to make them a little easier to work with. Total annual savings of this $250,000 project were about $45,000. And that translated to $3,750 per month in energy savings. And their monthly loan payment was actually less than that. So they got a 10-year loan and their energy savings exceeded the loan payment. So they paid no money out of pocket and were on a positive cash flow from day one of the project. So after paying off the loan over that 10 years, they actually netted a savings of $183,000. I'll take you to one extreme example now as well. This is one that they wanted. They actually already had air source heat pumps in place. They had 40 of them in the building, and they were past end of life. They were failing. They were leaking refrigerant into the atmosphere, which is also another greenhouse gas. So they wanted us to come in and figure out how they could replace all of those and what would be the return on investment and savings. And what we found was that for the 15-year term of their loan, if they replaced all of those air source heat pumps with fairly high efficiency, kind of medium efficiency units, that their project would actually pay for itself in 15 years. So they would have a net cost over that 15 years of $1,000 on a $1.4 million project. But by improving the system and going to a central chilled and hot water system that would fit their existing ventilation system, because of the efficiencies they could get out of managing that single centrifugal chiller, they were actually going to net nearly $900,000 in savings just by increasing the amount paid for the project by $800,000. So that project cost, instead of being $1.4 million as shown up in the top line of the air source heat pump, the project cost would go to $2.2 million. We're actually still waiting for the controller to hash it out with the owner of the building. The financial manager who works for the owner keeps looking at the bottom line and saying we need to do the $2.2 million project, but the owner doesn't want to borrow more than $1.4 million. And so he's actually trying to raise money other ways so he can still just borrow $1.4 million, but do the $2.2 million project. Just a great opportunity for them to do better, use less energy. It involves a system that's actually going to last for 25 to 30 years as opposed to 20 years. And so there's some benefits that way as well, and huge maintenance savings that they are going to have with the central system because they're just dealing with one primary system rather than 40 different heat pumps throughout the building. So just to wrap things up, just doing an in-kind replacement of what you already have in place for heating and air conditioning is not usually your best move as far as saving energy and reducing your impact on the environment. You usually have a lot of different options to look at. So just having the contractor that maintains your equipment come in and put the exact same thing back in when the existing equipment comes to end of life, definitely not the way to go. You want to look at all of your options, and people can do an analysis of both the engineering and the financial end of things. And so look at the actual energy savings that you can reap. The other thing is that often when you do an upgrade on your heating and air conditioning systems, there's an opportunity to improve the comfort and improve the management of the building and improve the productivity of the people in the building, improve the learning environment for the students by taking care of some of the issues that you might have with unbalanced heating or unbalanced cooling, where people are freezing in one room and have the windows open in the middle of winter in a room across the hall. And so coming in and doing the right kind of system can actually eliminate or reduce a lot of those problems with comfort issues that you often have in a building like a school building or an office building. So I thank you for your time today, and we're going to take some time to take some questions. I know some were being sent um, by message throughout the presentation, and so here's the opportunity to talk about them.